So here we are again to talk about the mental obsession, the effects on our mentality, or the choices we make about how we think, not the fact that we think. And one of the things that occurred to me this morning as I was getting ready was to remind everyone that there's no way that I can communicate this reasonably enough to have anyone come to terms with it because of the words I use or the way I speak about it. Because we each have the capacity to make decisions for ourselves. We're actually volunteers in terms of the thinking we do. Because we're free to think, we voluntarily make choices about how we think. Now, it can feel as though they're not voluntary choices and they're happening to us. But to the degree that that's happening, in my experience, I have made believe that those things have nothing to do with me and that somehow they're happening to me. And as a result, there's nothing I can do about them. And as a result, the only thing I can continue to do is operating as though I am completely detached from them, meaning I'm only going to do the same thing I was doing that caused the upset and here comes Gabe. The upset and the friction that I was confronting to begin with. Good morning, Gabe. So I'm going to start a little bit again, Gabe, too, because one of the points I thought of this morning is the fact that this can't be spoken about rationally enough. If anyone is interested in maintaining irrational ideas or unreasonable ideas, and what those ideas would be is that despite all the evidence that conflicts exist, that the thoughts that create that conflict are actually right, when in fact that conflict is created by a wrong thought thinking it's right, by us choosing to make believe that a wrong thought is right. That conflict we cannot escape as long as we continue to maintain the idea that the conflicts, that the wrong thoughts we have are right. And one of the primary issues of that is thinking that thoughts are in fact reality. If I think my thoughts are reality, I think I become the creator of reality. If I become the creator of reality, I have now created myself. And I now think that I am in my thoughts because I don't think of my thoughts as something I'm doing. I begin to think of them as something I am. And when I think of them as something I am, I feel damned and condemned. And my behavior begins to reflect it because I'm in a constant cycle of addictive cycle to my mentality, thinking it's reality. And obsessive thoughts are constantly trying to perfect the self that I imagine myself to be, when it really is only thinking of itself. I've utilized the potential I have to think about my thinking as a contemplative advantage and turned it against my own instincts for survival, claiming my only survival depends on continuing to maintain the same thinking, which if it is causing conflict and emotional turmoil and mental anguish, it's going to continue to do that as long as I continue to think that way. So there's nothing I can do about that for anyone. It's up to each of us to look at what we're doing and decide in our own experience what we are doing and how we're doing it. And it's not up to me to tell you that. I talk about this because my experience has been when the audience is opened up a little bit, especially because I worked with people one-on-one for years, and then realized that working one-on-one was great for people when they were one-on-one, but it didn't really give them the chance to operate socially on that basis because there wasn't any broader action than them and I. And so when we started this conversation, there were times that there were a lot of reactivity. There was a lot of upset. People didn't come back. There was all kinds of things that between people within the conversation they didn't like. But the focus of the conversation, my interest in this is focusing the conversation on the absolute state of reality rather than try to get into the weeds over the dysfunctional state of thinking in fractured terms as being reality. So the longer in sobriety, there's a very common term called a bottom that people seem to get to when they finally say, I've had enough, and start looking at their experience accurately enough to say, I can't keep doing what I'm doing if I'm interested in getting better. And the idea of addiction is that I keep doing the wrong thing as the right thing, and it becomes the only thing because I think I have nothing to do with it. I just think it's a condition that somehow my body has, and I have nothing to do with it, and I can't do anything about it. So I continue to do the same thing over and over again, which I mentioned earlier. So if the bottom is the point at which I decide to stop digging, what I've been digging for is a treasure that seems to be buried that I can never find. And the reason for that digging is because I think that treasure is not here now. That it isn't my immediate experience that has those denying thoughts bring that sense of darkness. It's the immediacy of my conclusion that those thoughts are true, and thus the only thing I have to do. And so my behavior follows. So one of the things that we talked about yesterday with Lensis, and I want to go a little deeper in that today, is about forgiveness and about starting to see that forgiveness isn't about forgiving the other person. It's about seeing that we've been holding them hostage to ideas that we have about what they did, well beyond the point they stopped doing what they did. And I think in your case, you were talking about something 14 years ago. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
And that was probably enough time to maybe notice that he was no longer doing what he did. And yet it seemed very much like something he had done that continued to plague you and hurt you, and you suffered from as a result of that experience. And yesterday we talked about in the podcast episode with Lensis and her daughter, we talked about the fact that the present nature is always present, and the things that happened are not happening now. They're only happening in our thoughts. And our thoughts, ego is only happening in our thought in terms of this false self. Lies are only happening in our thoughts in terms of the ability and the idea that we can think more about something and turn something that's wrong into right. Those only happen in our thoughts. A lack of forgiveness only happens in our thoughts, because forgiveness is actually for being forgiving things what they are, as they are now. And what are they now when something stopped 14 years ago, but nothing more than a thought I'm having about it? So the forgiveness is coming to terms with my culpability, my decisions, my conclusions, rather than the things that happened. I don't need to straighten anybody out to do that. And what happens automatically is my relationship with them straightens out, because I straighten out mentally, physically, spiritually.
And Jack, the most beautiful thing happened when you give me the tool to apply that forgiveness to that episode. I immediately felt that change in my brain. Something happened and I felt something going out, and I feel happy, and oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I'm doing that in every chapter through 14 years in my life, and I applying that.
So now,
happy.
See, what you think came to you is simply the not doing of the thing you kept doing that gave you the impression that that thing that you thought came wasn't there. The preoccupation of these lies that we maintain consume all our attention, because it's impossible to ever turn them into truth. They're fantasy. We're trying to turn them into reality. It's an impossibility. So the further we dig, all we get is deeper in a hole that's technically a grave. And we're starting to feel the fear of the fact that we keep digging and digging and digging for a treasure that we never seem able to find. And all of a sudden, that freedom, just considering as you did, that maybe it was what you were doing that caused it, bam, the whole bubble bursts, because you now are outside of the bubble looking at it and saying, that's crazy, rather than thinking you're in it and there's nothing you can do. That transition between the two is palpable, because all of a sudden you think reality's come and love has come and the awareness has come and the adventure of life and the awesome nature of that inspiration is coming, but it isn't coming. What's happening is you're no longer preoccupied with a thought that's giving you the impression that it's not here. You're creating that thought to consume your attention, and then using that consumption of attention, just like an intoxication with alcohol or drugs. Trying to feel better by denying what's happening doesn't ever feel better. It can feel like it's better within the thinking, but it's actually getting worse as time passes, and the tension is growing and growing and growing.
Yes, because 14 years happened and I thought it was done. But no, it was there. Always.
Yeah.
By using those tools, using this wisdom, is helping me to expand my happiness, because for real, I want to live in this earth. ¿Cómo se dice? I want to live full man, como
Full measure.
exactly in this earth. I want to feel happy, like for real happiness. Beautiful. No, with a mask. You know what is silly to me? How many people, including me, were wearing a mask? We weren't happy because we were facing pain and things like that. But now we understand and take this wisdom, apply, practicing, and feel it because it's real. This is real. It's real.
Yeah, well, that mask you're talking about is sort of like standing in front of a mirror, not liking what's in the mirror, and then yelling at the mirror to change while you're the one standing in front of it. And it's the same. It sounds ridiculous to say that, but it's exactly what we do by not facing what we're facing. Think about it. We think we're facing what we're facing, while what we're facing is an illusion that we've made believe is reality, and wonder why we feel terrified and alone in the universe. Because we're trying to create reality that already exists entirely and make believe that somehow it's ours, and wonder why we feel disconnected and less than and alone and separate and low self-esteem. Why would we have any self-esteem when the self that is we're claiming has esteem has no life? It has no existence. It doesn't even have low self-esteem. It has no esteem whatsoever. So feeling less than is actually an accurate assessment of the thinking we're doing, not the being that we are, not the essence of our life, not the essence of our knowing, not the essence of the capital self, the self-realized, self-actualized, actually realizing what's happening rather than what is imagined to be happening, what is thinking is happening, what we're thinking is happening.
But wouldn't the mask be fake it till you make it? I mean, I know like in doing things repetitively that I start to believe it. Like, you know, when I'm trying to do a forgiveness with about some people, a person, place, or thing, and every day I get on my knees and wish them nothing but abundance and love, and I believe it. And then anything ugly, mean, or bad, or my resentments just melt away. So I don't know if the mask is wholly a bad thing.
Well, I don't know that anything is wholly a bad thing when they're just considered imagined. But my sense is there's lots of ways, to play with our capacity in thinking. And, you know, the idea of faking it till you make it is to also not recognize that you're making up the faking. And in the same time, if the essence of life is life, and if the essence of truth is true, and if the essence of reality is reality, then it isn't something that ever changes. And it doesn't take a lot to think about to basically concede that and begin to see that nothing we've ever held against anyone was anything other than a thought we held that was wrong, thought to be right. If I start looking from that vantage point, I start knowing the awareness I have that's greater than the thinking, because the thinking can't compete with that at all, which is why it constantly, obsessive thinking tries to perfect a self that doesn't exist. Why would it have to be obsessive about something and consumed with something if we are already consumed in the nature of nature? It wouldn't even be there. But Janet, to your point, you're really talking, there's an interim stage, I suspect, in this awareness process, one of which is beginning to see how flexible our thoughts actually are, right? When you start faking it and thinking, realizing that your own resistance and denial, you're not quite ready to come to terms with. So you play as though you are. You're simply imagining you are, right?
Yes.
And that simple imagination is all it takes, because you begin to see that that other stuff starts to dissolve. But you're still in a rational thinking about it. But even within thinking, you can get better and feel better. But if the ultimate absolute nature isn't recognized as having been absolute the entire time, regardless of what you thought, you're going to loop back and create new circumstances to help work that out. That process is going to go on. What's interesting is that justification and rationalization are actually proving how flexible our thoughts are, meaning that they're never what we think when we think they're fixed and can't have, we're stuck in them, they're fixed, there's nothing we can do about them. They're actually proving there's something we can do about them, but they're fighting for proof that they're real. They're fighting for proof that they won't change by constantly changing the fight that they're having. It's crazy to think of the extent we can go in the mental gymnastics we can perform
I
and
had
make believe that somehow we're going to get better someday when we feel better momentarily, but we're also delaying and building an explosive potential that tends to explode in the face of circumstances that seem very small, but the reaction is huge because it's finally like that volcanic urge just explodes on somebody. So if you watch for those things, you'll notice what they are. And I have those. I still react. There are things I do not like and I do not tolerate very well. I don't like people who are aggressive.
Mm.
I don't like people who actually pose threats to other people. I'm very keen to that. I was stabbed once, so I have a sensitivity to that whole process. But it doesn't mean that I make it better by reacting, though I may postpone some of the physical ailments that could come from pretending the guy is fine and he's not going to do anything. Because that's what I did with the first guy. I just thought, well, I couldn't even imagine somebody doing what he did. So as a result of that lack of imagination, I was subject to an experience that was pretty intense. Lensis, I could see you panting.
Oh, I am taking the little notes. Yes.
You look like you were about to say something, though.
I have experienced exactly what you are describing. I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we all share the same makeup. You know, when you're talking about faking it, Jana, we all share the same makeup in terms of our genetic makeup. It's already made up. And we have a platform that we're operating from. And if that platform is based on an absolute spiritual nature, and I don't say spirit in terms of trying to identify a God amongst other gods, but simply a state of being, an infinite, unlimited, absolute, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent state of power, whatever that is. I don't even know if it's power because we use that word power because we're so used to thinking when we can control other people and manipulate other people and influence other people in our direction that we have control and power, but that is actually not control and power. It's manipulation. It's just coercion rather than allowing people to do what they want and recognize the ultimate abundance would not have us think things scarcely, but abundantly and not fight for things, but actually just allow things and watch things and be the adventure of that process be awesome rather than something that needs to go exactly according to my plan, my way, my thoughts. Harry has some experience. You know, Harry and I did a talk last week, and you know, he's experienced. He shared some of the same things you did, Lensis.
Repeat again, Jack. Repeat again.
Repeat again.
Yes. What did you said before?
About Harry?
Oh, about Harry had some of the same experiences you did in the talk that I had with him just before the one I had with you. Harry and I think talked on Wednesday and recorded.
Wow.
So one of the things I'm starting to do for all of you is that for years, people have called me, and I generally don't talk to them unless I have an hour, because it generally takes an hour to sit and listen and process and all that. So there's a lot of times I'm not available, and I don't make myself available to tell them I don't have time. I don't bother to tell them I don't have time. I simply am not available until I have time. And when I do, I take that time. So one of the things I realized is that I might as well be Harry was, you know, Harry called, I think, on Tuesday. I said, Harry, why don't you come back Wednesday and we'll record the conversation and just talk about it openly and let other people listen to it. And the point of this conversation is to be able to have a conversation that gives people an option and start to think about things they may not normally think about. And if it weren't for the knowing nature we all have, the only way this conversation could succeed was that it would be rational enough to be systematic enough and ordered enough and said well enough to convince people of something. But if we already know it, there's no convincing that can be done. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't make any difference until the individual receiving it decides that it makes a difference, or maybe they do know something more than they think. And maybe some of these thoughts are worth considering and starting to look at the effects as evidence of the cause of that conflicted thinking. So where there's inner conflict and emotional turmoil and mental anguish, I could guarantee you from my experience that those are all attached, those experiences are all effects of thinking The base root of thoughts are reality. And so every thought I have, no matter how close it might get to something that's functional or useful, are always going to be corrupted in some way, because any variation of that process, any expectation I have now is that things should only go the way I think they'll go. And rather than see that to do that means I'm trying to create one possibility in the midst of all possibilities, I am taking all possibilities and diminishing them down to one possibility. And I would say that's a very scarce approach to an abundant nature. And so what do I feel? Afraid, anxious, stressed, pressure. Why? Because I'm resisting nature in my thinking by making believe the thing I'm thinking is true. And now I have to fight it, to protect it, and to prove it at the same time, both defending it, trying to prove it. While in fact, if it were real, it would have no defense, because it would never be at risk. In an absolute state, nothing's at risk. And so we are looking like people did originally at the horizon and thought that it was the edge of doom, and that if they sailed out to sea, they'd fall off the edge. And people didn't sail to sea. But what they were really feeling that was doomed was the limit of their own thought. That's what was doomed. And for us, the circumstances we use to justify the feelings we're having have nothing to do with the circumstances, but what we're thinking about those circumstances and what we're thinking about those people, places, and things. And if I believe my limited thoughts are true, I believe there is no reality beyond that limit. And so I have no objectivity. I'm subjective in my thinking. And what do I become? Subject to all the ramifications of that too. That sense of disorder. Life's terms are in perfect order. When I start thinking of them only according to my terms and my thinking, I begin to think disordered. My thinking becomes disordered. So what do I have? Disorders. They're growing. The disorders that humans are suffering mentally are growing. And what do we treat? The effect. Help people feel better. To your point, Jana.
Yeah.
If the essence is looked at as being essential to our experience rather than something that's optional and negotiable, the thoughts we have that we think will finally kind of relieve it a little bit all of a sudden start to seem impractical and improbable. While they are certainly possible, we can still do it, doesn't mean they're going to work. It's been a delusion the whole time. An illusion thought of as reality is delusional. Thoughts are illusions. They're imagined. They're things that we generate in our brain that we attach pictures to and words to, just like a screenwriter develops a movie. If they're good enough to develop it. And we're pretty masterful to have developed a population of people that seem to be struggling with this and don't even notice. They think of addiction as only the people on the street suffering from drugs and alcohol and fentanyl and all this stuff that we talk about, and don't see that it's part of the mental state of society's ills that are allowing that condition to happen, and then think there's nothing we can do about it but build them condos. And that's basically the major opinion right now. If you give people a place to live, they'll be better off. Hasn't proven itself to be true at all, because many of those people burn the places down they end up in, or they end up overdosing from the freedom they have now to be hidden and be more comfortable doing what they're doing. We're encouraging people to get worse by not asking any accountability from them and presuming they're incapable of accountability. That's a social ill. Thinking that people's dignity is completely stripped from them simply because they've degraded themselves so obviously, but that degradation is throughout society. The policies that lead to that are actually the same degraded idea that what's wrong is right and somehow it someday will get better. It hasn't yet. Suicide's at an all-time rate. Drug addiction. I interviewed Dr. Jan Schwartz in her new book. She said that gambling is the biggest source of money laundering. I thought it was drugs. Gambling's much bigger than that, and it's accepted as a social norm. For years, it was illegal, and all of a sudden, when states figured they could make money from lotteries, all of a sudden they started bending the rules for their own sake. Government inherently benefits by growing, not shrinking. And yet they're not a profit-bent organization. They don't have the same They don't have the same responsibilities that an individual does to maintain fiscal responsibility. So we have an enormous fiscal irresponsibility going on that cannot possibly be sustained. It's impossible. And we're witnessing it. There never seems to be enough money for the most basic things, but there seem to be trillions of dollars for things that are optional. I'm not condemning society. I'm simply mentioning that we are all party to that, participants of it. We are playing roles that contribute to it. And those roles, if they are false in any way and thought to be the only thing we can do, are exactly the same thing that all those other people that we point to and say are wrong are doing, and we're culpable. We're part of it as a society, as a species, even broader than a society. Society is small compared to the 8.5 billion people. Any thoughts? I can't imagine. Gabe?
Thank you for having us here.
Hmm.
Thank you for everything you're sharing. I am.
Well, thanks for showing up. You're all volunteers.
Oh my God. This is so powerful. Well, I don't have another description to say, because this is what I'm feeling. I'm feeling so, wow, we have everything to be better, to do amazing.
You know, again, I don't know. We started the recording a little late because we waited for Gabe, but I don't know if I said this before or after the recording, but the conversation with Lensis and her daughter was very revealing, because Esther, who is 16, is as intuitive as anybody I ever encountered. And when I first talked to her, I said, you know, you're seeing things immediately that many adults struggle for years with. And she said, really? Thinking of adults as these sort of masters of the universe, not seeing that very often the mastery is in the maintaining of the baggage and the ideas and the resentments and the unforgiving concepts and the contemptful, spiteful, hateful things about circumstances that aren't even happening. And so the talk that I did yesterday with Lensis and her daughter is very interesting, because Esther is very keen and insightful, and also offered, what was the name of the fox?
It's let me see.
I have it on my phone. It's something that Apple did, and it's a movie that talks about this apparently, and was an Academy Award winner.
Yes, Oscar.
Yeah, Oscar Award winner. Which may be the same thing. Let me see if I can find the name, because I know that you sent it to me. So it's worth mentioning, because this isn't a new conversation. It's been going on for a long time, but it seems to have been going on a basis of people constantly seeking and seeking and seeking to find, rather than conceding that there is nothing lost. Starting to see that the absolute nature of nature is absolutely right here now. It's always been that way. It will always be that way. It's the nature of nature, and it is our nature. It isn't something we need to go find. It was the boy, the mole, the fox, and the horse. And she got tears talking about it. Esther did, because she said it's very similar to what we're talking about. There have been great poets, Rumi, who've talked about this through history. There have been great prophets who have talked about this. It is not an uncommon thread. And yet here we are, as advanced a civilization as we've ever been in terms of time, still struggling critically with this same basic premise within society. So question is, what can we do? What we can do right here, right now. Yeah, each of us, we're all volunteers. We're voluntarily choosing thoughts to entertain and then make believe they're true, because we think somehow we're going to prove ourselves. Well, if the proof of ourself is trying to turn what's wrong into right, the proof is something seriously wrong. So to look at it naturally is to start to see the effects are actually revealing the cause. The feeling bad, the feeling wrong, the feeling disconnected, the feeling isolated, the feeling alone, the feeling sad, the feeling hurt, the feeling, all that stuff are absolute reflections of a knowing awareness that would not feel those things if we didn't know better. Gabe, you here yet?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I wanted to mention, going back, because this is a couple of times ago, you sent me that thing that Sam Fuller did about choice.
Oh, yeah.
So, he makes great points. I have said many times we're free to choose whatever we want, but he's actually saying, well, we're really free to choose whatever we can choose that's free to choose, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's saying there are some things that we can't choose. And I would say one of those things is the absolute nature of nature. We don't choose it. We're just of it naturally. It's not a choice. Maybe there was a choice at some point, but it's not one that we're at this point. If that choice was ever made by us, it is certainly the nature of our existence right now. But I would say it isn't a choice because within the context of an absolute nature, there's no thinking. So there are no choices. It's just an absolute state of being that has never changed, didn't start, didn't end, can't end. There's no beginning, no end, no alpha, no omega. Something that is perplexing to think about rationally, but if it exists, it exists. And may be worth conceding simply as a thought, rather than debating and arguing and trying to put new words to it to prove it or disprove it. So I think he made some great points. But the one point we can make here is that if we have the choice to choose, we also simultaneously have the choice not to choose. And if that's the only freedom we have within the range of things we're free to think about, whatever that range is, and whatever would be excluded by that range, that one aspect of it would be a principled basis of choice, because it wouldn't be a choice if we couldn't make it or couldn't otherwise do something about it. It would sort of violate the whole premise of choice. So if we can choose to think there's nothing we can do about it, that's an interesting choice because it violates the principle that we can also not choose that thought.
Jack, I don't understand what you mean by the absolute nature of nature. What that means.
Good one.
Hmm?
Jack?
So I'm going to look it up. I'm going to look up a word for you.
Okay.
Omniscience, for instance. So omniscience is the quality or state of being. Omniscient is having infinite awareness, understanding, and insight. So infinite means no limits, no bounds, no parts, no pieces. And I would say even in this definition, it's once more trying to qualify it as understanding and insight, when ultimately the only understanding and insight we can have of it is that it is absolutely not bound by understanding or insight that can be out of sight. It's just a present state of being that is uninterruptible, inviolable, immutable, uncontestable, though we can think we can contest it, though we can think it isn't true, though we can think things that would oppose us, which in my estimation confirms the freedom it offers us to even consider that our own considerations right now can actually obstruct it and think it's not there, and think as a result of thinking it's not there that it doesn't exist, rather than say, I can think it's not there and also know that it's there. Once again, putting thought within the realm of thought rather than thought the creator of reality and the maker of that absolute source. So infinite would be another word that would reflect that absolute nature. And one of the books that Bill Wilson wrote or read, so infinite, first definition is extending indefinitely, endlessly, immeasurable or inconceivably great or extensive, inexhaustible, subject to no limitation or external determination. So it's not up to decision making. It simply exists as it exists as a being nature that has no basis in anything other than its own reality. which would be reality. It would be our reality too.
Take Ruby
Where?
with me to work, Target, and then to the party at Anna
Oh,
Park.
okay. So you're going to leave her.
Okay.
Hang on, Katie's making some plans for granddaughter Ruby. So you're going to take her and drop her luggage with him too,
Yeah.
Walter. She should have made that arrangement already too.
She's done it.
Okay, bye. Have
Bye.
fun. Update me by text.
We're out and we'll do it.
So if something, the steps were based on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and now the 12 steps of all the other 12-step programs, of which there are well over 100 of them, indicating that symptoms all identify the same basic problem. The steps were based on absolutes. Purity, think of purity, it's perfect. Absolutely pure. Absolute purity. Absolute honesty. What is that? Truth. Just reckoning with what's happening, facing what you're facing, Jana. The idea that we're facing what's actually happening rather than some perversion of it, another version of it. So it was purity, honesty, unselfishness. What's the self? Book says we need to crush the self at death. Absolutely, utterly abandon self. Why would we have to abandon this thing if it had any value whatsoever? It's a delusion. It's literally a self-imposed, self-induced. Here's the self inducing and imposing an idea about itself as though it's true, created by the same false self that we're thinking is who we are. Not true. And love, pure love, was the other one. So the original steps were based on, if you're in a moment of doubt, are you applying these principles in all your affairs? Are you applying these principles in the affairs right now? The absolute nature of these absolute words or terms. And I would say, I don't know that I've ever applied them within my thinking fully. And yet, if it's the nature of existence, they've always been applicable and they've always been applied and they've always been readily available. It's not the principles that disappear. It's my own human conscious conversation in my brain, my mentality that feels like they disappear because I've become so consumed with that narrow band of thoughts, which creates enormous, my sense is it's present stress disorder, traumatic stress disorder that it creates. It's horrifying to imagine that my thinking is responsible for getting me to reality, which I can never seem to arrive at. Constantly trying. Like the nightmares I've had where I'm running down a hallway and the hallway just continues to get longer. Can never seem to get there. Probably not an accident. Those nightmares happen. Those nightmares seem to be horrifying possibilities that I must be doing something about during my daydream to make believe I'm not doing anything about, to have them continue to occur at night, whenever they occur. So I don't remember the last time I had a night dream, but my dreams have gone to floating and flying. And I think part of that is the relief that comes with starting to conceive that the absolute's absolute, regardless of what I think. So my thinking has absolutely nothing to do with it in terms of confirming it. But when I begin to concede that, I begin to realize that my thinking is actually designed to channel and express it. And that's the healing, forgiving, giveness of the idea that I'm a volunteer here, doing what I can to be as useful and helpful as possible, which does not include helping people get worse by making believe I pat them on the back and telling them it's going to be okay, rather than remind them it's okay right now. It's what you're making of it that is actually the struggle. That healthy nature has a chance to actually function when the stress we're imposing on our experience in our body is no longer chronically imposing that depressive pressure. What I noticed initially, Santiago, when I began to concede that point, was that I noticed how reactive I had been and how inactive I had been and how impulsive I had been and how compulsive I was in 50 other areas than the one I thought was my primary addiction, which was alcohol. Multiple areas I had compulsions in because I had an impulsive idea that I couldn't sit still and had to go do something all the time.
I like what you said about it's not going to be okay. It's already okay. I like that a lot.
Well, and you remember the point, I remember, God, it was probably 6 months ago or more. The whole idea that we've humanized God and dispirited humans.
Yes.
We've created God as a man. All right. First of all, now he's got a gender, which means he would have all the organs to go with that. That's a pretty, if size matters for men, God would have it all. Right. That whole concept. Right. But we think of him as a father, being a man in a body, choosing and not choosing to answer our prayers, meaning we either get what we want or we don't get what we want. When we don't get what we want, we think we don't have enough faith in that God. But that God is actually the ego. We're actually praying to our thinking, that our thinking finally straighten out and begin to provide us the things, because we have turned that into God. If I become the creator of reality by thinking is in fact reality, I now think I'm God. And ego is effectively that concept. Ego, by its Latin root, is actually the capital I, the I that we all are. The small I, this false self that we have now designated as that word, is not who we are, it's what we think we are. So I can't be what I think I am if I am as I am. I can only think that. And that would reduce my capacity to express the I am by literally relying only on what I think. And all of a sudden, the conflict with reality and life's terms becomes obvious, because I constantly seem to have conflicts, circumstances that are pressing in on me, things that are small that seem enormously complicated because of the fact that I'm using anything to help justify this wrong idea, when in fact, everything around me is already right. It's what I'm making out of it that's wrong. The only animals that suffer from depression, by the way, apparently, are domesticated. When we have domesticated our thoughts, it's interesting that we act like they're foreign. We act like our body language is foreign and we don't listen to it, which is exactly what addiction does. Pretends I have nothing to do with it, so there's nothing I can do about it, so I might as well just continue doing what I always do. I referred to that yesterday as the unholy trinity when we were walking. It's just this procession of thoughts that goes round and round and round and round and round, and it can never do anything else because it's only thought thinking about thought, which is maddening, literally. Drives us crazy. Why? It doesn't drive us crazy because the mentality we're utilizing in a brain that is designed to express reality and truth and love is being utilized in a way that is mistaken. And understanding becomes misunderstanding, and nature becomes unnatural, and normal becomes abnormal, and all of those things get flipped around, because that's the nature of a lie, trying only to be what it can't be. True.
Jack,
Yes, sir.
we've been doing this for a year and change now, maybe more, 2 years.
3.
I continue to, and we've talked at depth about many subjects, yet some days I still wake up and want that alternate reality.
Yeah,
So,
me too.
so what's the problem?
Well,
After all this understanding and talking, most days it's not, but some days it is.
I imagine after history has we have inherited the DNA that's been developed throughout the entire history of humanity. We are basically at the forefront of that accumulation. And we're also at the forefront of all the social, cultural, mythological superstitions, etc., ideas, right? So if we're barely able to talk about this between us in a way that's actually constructive and productive and useful, facing the entirety of everything that is wrong can be a pretty daunting prospect. And if you look at the world, as my lens got clearer, I started seeing how hurt I was, not about what I was doing, but about things that were happening around me, because my view went from being totally focused on what I thought and what I wanted, what I felt, to starting to see that I actually had great compassion for what was happening around me. And that compassion probably started when I was very young and I didn't know what to do with it. And I didn't see a world that was giving me much direction in that direction. So I started to build the defenses and all the reactions. Whatever the justification I used that I did what I did to get to the point where I thought it was the only thing I could do. So beginning to actually look at it is daunting. You know, I had a whole familial relationship based on all that insanity. Starting to notice that and being in it is a little tricky. Having very little experience to say, oh, I really haven't been honest here. I really haven't said the things that occurred to me and thought that by not saying them, I'm saving people from me, when all I'm saving them from are my thoughts. And those thoughts then start to just weigh on me as though they're an impossibility to ever express and share. That's part of what we're doing here. Just having a chance to say, you know, it's hard to admit for me, the idea of being an alcoholic was just, I really much preferred being a drug addict. It sounded cooler from the era that I grew up in. But being an alcoholic just sounded like a guttural guy pissing and shitting in his pants and vomiting it all over himself and laying in the gutter. That's how I saw it. So the stigma attached to it kept me from wanting to associate to it. But the stigma attached to insanity has people who aren't as bad as other people think they're not sane or that they're not insane. If we're not as bad as some of the people at the worst, we consider ourselves perfectly sane. And I would say that's not true and that's not accurate, because to allow them to suffer in that way and not actually treat the cause by constantly treating the effect is an indication that the society at large has a very big problem mentally with our own ability to cognate and respond to and concede an awareness that we're all part of it, that we're all involved in this. So I would say those things on a morning when you wake up could be a little tough to stomach. And I feel that, Gabe. I feel that. It's upsetting. It's very upsetting.
I'm just curious of the evolutionary reasons, you know, like this return to old thinking or ingrained thinking of the past. I don't know. Just interesting.
Well, it's certainly a possibility, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it isn't something we shouldn't do if we're doing it. Because if we're doing it, it's exactly what we should be doing. It doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. It doesn't mean it's the only thing we can do. But to see it accurately is to start to see the ridiculous nature of it if we're looking at it accurately and it's ridiculous. Or the unsustainability of it if we're looking at it accurately and what we're doing is unsustainable. To start looking at it accurately actually starts to actually see that those things that you may still be reacting to are also things you can be responding to and starting to say, wow, I've done this so long, I really think it's the only thing I can do today. Once more, another day, I think this is it. And living with that is exactly what the voluntary decision is that we started with today. We talked a little before you came on, but I waited to record until you came. Talked about the voluntary aspect of our own decision making. It's nothing I can say. There's no rationale. There's no words. I can't do it well enough to convince anybody of anything, because any thread of resistance, any thread of denial to the individual doing that will be thought of as the only thing they can do, or at least thought of as something worth doing. And to that degree, just like putting my hands over my eyes, I can keep myself from seeing something. It doesn't mean that thing I'm keeping myself from seeing isn't happening. Perfectly free to do that. You, Gabe, have also had some of those bubbles pop. I know from our conversation.
Yeah.
Where you've had a sense of clarity that's, I would say, inspired and clear and free of the conflict and somewhat almost unnerving to the point to imagine that all that stuff we held on to and thought was a lifeline was actually killing us, was actually undermining our body's capacity to heal. And I would say that proof is that we think healing is a miracle while disease is natural. And it's really not. It is not natural. Healing is natural. That's how our bodies are designed. Homeostasis is one of the basic balancing acts that our body is constantly doing. When we throw it out of whack, it responds accordingly because it will take our direction. It's a pretty permissive opportunity we have.
Yeah, I just want to say that my experience was not as joyful or amazing as Lindsay's recent description, which means to say we all have our own white light moments that may not include white light, but mine was very sort of gradual over some days and weeks, but come to the same joyfulness in the end. But for those listening, it's not always this mountaintop revelation, but still can be achieved.
Can I say something, Jack?
I
Yes,
hope so.
I want to say something too. I want to say something.
Let Harry start, Lenses.
Yes.
Harry beat you. Go ahead, Harry.
Yeah, you saying
Oh,
about hi. Yeah, my experience took about not even weeks, days, months. It took about a year, close to a year and a half, just to be where I am right now. It was painful. It was painful, but once I started to see once I started to see what I was doing wrong, waking up every morning thinking about the same thing, and then I started to realize what I like. Like I spoke with Chuck today, what I like, what I don't like about my thinking. Sometimes I would just be like, I would just get dark thoughts and be like, you know what, today is a new day. I think I can beat this stuff. I can do it, and tell everybody about it. But he would just take me for a ride, and then I was in deep trouble. So once I stopped doing that, I started to train my brain day by day, day by day, and then here I am. My experience wasn't very joyful. And like I said before, it took a year and a half. It was painful, but thanks to Jack, here I am.
Well, and it's really thanks to you, Harry, and what you did, because the first time we spoke, and I'll bring you back to that point because we talked about it in the last few weeks.
Yes.
You were standing outside a hospital and absolutely scared to death that you were going insane.
Yes. That was. I should remember that. It's before I used to have PTSD about that moment.
Yeah.
But not anymore. I just accepted. Just let it be. Let that energy flow. And then you were talking about movies like maybe 30 minutes ago. One movie on Netflix that I actually watched a few months ago. It's Thank You for Your Service. I really
Mhm.
I really I really actually see myself as one of those guys. When he had a mental breakdown about his thoughts, that was just me. That was me. I was
Right.
to the point that I asked, just leave me alone. But I was the one starting those thoughts. I was the one creating the stories. I was the one going along with it. But
And
yes, go ahead, John.
that morning or that afternoon when you called the first time, you were willing to simply take a little bit of direction, which was to embrace
Yes,
the crazy. I
yes,
said, what if you just go crazy for a minute and see how it goes? And it
yes,
popped that bubble because you were no longer
yes,
fighting it. You were starting to say, oh, well, when I think crazy thoughts, I'm going to feel crazy.
yes.
And,
That was an eye-opening. Yeah. That's a great experience.
and to Gabe's point, Harry, and I want you to comment on this. One of the things I've realized is that I am still scared of the fear that caused by that thinking.
Oh yes, that happens to me, but I just let it be. Just, just,
Yeah.
just let the energy flow. Don't. I mean, I'm still afraid. I'm still get thoughts, but it's just. I know where this is going if I let that thought take me further.
Well,
I don't
and
like that.
here's the interesting thing though, is that the fear that I'm fearing now is the awareness that if I continue, I'm going to do things that are life threatening.
Yes, yes,
It's actually a clear awareness that I can continue And I am afraid. Why? Because I know better. My instincts are actually now being seen as instinctive rather than as things to hide from and get over and deny and fight and try to rewrap in some new way by just saying, of course I'm afraid. I'm about to do something. It's like standing on the edge of a cliff and I'm deciding to take a step. It's all it takes. And that if my body didn't know better, I would not have that awareness. So to begin to see it as a natural function, this was something that Esther noticed. She had been feeling bad thoughts and all that. And I said, it's natural to feel bad thoughts when you're thinking thoughts that are bad. Natural. And to think that our job is to feel better about those bad thoughts is once more to set this addictive cycle in action rather than note that our awareness is actually telling us the feelings we're having are feeling the thoughts that we're creating and thinking. And to align those is to start to say, oh, I don't even have to know what the thought is or how all I need to know is that I'm thinking about something that isn't right as being right. And now I have a relationship to that condition that I've created that is honest and open, and it allows it to dissipate because I am not thinking of it in some other way and trying to chase it away with those new thoughts. I'm just saying, oh, if it's what I'm doing it. And that's when I became aware that most of what I struggled with were thoughts I thought I wasn't having. But I could tell that I was struggling with them because I started to notice that the effects were telling me that. That was my body language. And it's a domestic body language that I was acting as though it was a foreign language so I could pretend that I didn't understand it and didn't know what was going on and kind of serve this whole idea that I have nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other day I felt sad, and then every time I felt like sad, I would just fight it. But just the other day I was like, I feel sad. That's it. I'm okay. I'm okay feeling sad. But people too before my mental breakdown, people would see me as an alpha male, but I was never an alpha male. I told my brothers, I opened up about 2 years ago. I was never an alpha male. I was never an extrovert person. I was just faking it. Yes, on the inside, because you were talking about fake it until you make it too. It's just at some point it gets to you. It's been over pretty much my whole life.
Yeah,
I was afraid. I was always, people would see me as an alpha male, but on the inside I was just afraid of everything. I was just a shy person. But once I opened up, people were like, "Well, you were an introvert? What's going on?" Even my brothers were like, "What's going on? This is not you." But that was me the whole time. That was me my whole life.
Isn't it interesting, Harry, that we can end up promoting an idea that's untrue that people become familiar with to think defines us. And when we stop doing that, they seem not to even recognize us.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. So in relation to your point about the resistance, quick story. My mother died when I was 15. I acted like it was fine because she was no longer in pain and all this rationale. I went to therapy when I was 25 or so and started to talk to somebody. And by 26, I had a thought getting onto the freeway that I missed my mother. Mm-hmm. And in 11 years, I'd never thought that. I actually liked the freedom I got because she was no longer disciplining me, setting limits. I could do what I wanted, all that kind of stuff. But I missed her and I loved her and I hadn't admitted it. And I admitted it that day. And literally couldn't drive. I started to cry and I had not cried for 11 years. I'd been mourning and grieving. And I pulled off the freeway and sat in a park for 3 hours and just cried. The next day, I had 8 bowel movements. I went to the bathroom 8 times. And I said, this is what full of shit is. I was lying. My body was tight. It was constricted. It was dehydrated. The blood wasn't flowing and my body had held on to shit. We talk about shit openly as something we want to get together, when in fact it's insane to think something will smell less if we get more of it together. I got to get my shit together. I got shit to do. We talk about it openly and not realizing it's shit. Shit is designed to be evacuated from the body. And when it isn't, the body misfires and starts to actually back up, and its ability to process health is reduced. So it was at 24 hours, the nerves, the tension, all of a sudden began to relax. And I got to go and go and go and go and go. Now that's kind of embarrassing, but at the same time, it's just a simple basic function of a body described in either a hyper state of contraction or a subtle state of expansion, beginning to release that tension, beginning to release those ideas. They were never true, but I held them to be true because somehow I thought I was saving myself from something that was so hard to face. And it's exactly, Gabe, what happens in some of the mornings is saying, wow, there's a lot to do today. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And there's a lot of things I've invested in myself and I wish I'd never gotten started. And there's a lot of regret I have about the decisions I made that today I need to make up for. And if I'm honest, I have those thoughts all the time. There is always a weighing of that. But when I'm also honest, I begin to see that they're simply thoughts about what I did, and I can't make them better by reinforcing the wrong I'm doing, but starting to see that they're thoughts I'm having, and they may be filled with some information that I might as well take advantage of right now, because my sense is that life's terms are always telling me what's actually happening, while the struggle I'm having are the ideas about that always happening is happening in my thinking about what's happening. The struggle isn't coming from life. It isn't coming from life's turns. They're not the inevitable thing that I think is going to wipe me out. What's going to get wiped out are the thoughts when I stop engaging them. They're just going to disappear. And to the self I think I disappear with that. And why wouldn't that be a goal? If I think all I am is what I think, not thinking that anymore would expose me naturally to the expansive nature of that awareness that is a knowing awareness that has me even able to notice what's wrong. Lenses. Thank you, Harry, by the way.
I want to hear something interesting. The reason why I think I am very quick on receiving this information is because 14 years ago, I faced one of the most uncomfortable experiences in my life. I was a young lady dreaming about America, coming to America, having a family. And I had those. I was married. I had my beautiful baby. Well, 2 years later, everything was gone. I lost everything, including my ex-husband. So I noticed that something was wrong, and I needed to figure it out. What was the thing? And also, I was rejected by people, and I didn't understand. So I tried to find something, like discover it. What is going on? Why? But before of that, I had God in my life, so I understand things. So when Jack is sharing this information, I get those because I had experienced it on improving something like that. My life, yes, I don't know how to explain this, but I recognize, I can see many things. I can see wisdom. I can see, and I get it. And I just practice what is Jack sharing, books or whatever. Because one of my things, I am an individual human being. I have my own experiences, pain, betray, all that kind of experiences. They give me information to be better human being. I am a mother, and I wanted to be an excellent mother. I wanted to give this human being all the love, all the tool that she could, ¿cómo se dice? Live in this earth and this planet now, because I don't know how to share more, but
Well, I suspect what you're saying is, we talked about this yesterday too, that the life's terms are the curriculum of life. Like we're going to a college class and we're in there every day. We're going there because there's something we might want to learn.
exactly.
Not because we need to learn it or have to learn it or should learn it, but it's something that we might want to learn in life.
Mm-hmm.
And the frustration we're having is the dysfunctional thoughts we have in relation to a functionally whole, abundant life. So the friction isn't coming from life. It isn't life that's hard. It isn't life that's difficult. It's the thoughts I have that are hard and impossible in relation to life, because they have no basis in reality. They have no substance, because they're just something I thought was true. So if I can conclude my thought to be true, I'm certainly capable of thinking something wrong to be true. And if I start seeing that as a conflict, the learning potential becomes, from the experiences I'm having, becomes enormously informative, because I realize all I'm really witnessing is my dysfunctional thinking relative to a very fully functional universe. So life's terms, when I'm thinking they're my terms, the only conflict is in the thinking I'm doing, not in life. It isn't in love. It isn't in the absolute nature of being. It's in the thinking I'm doing that's causing that. We have researched the universe. We know the stars. We know the planets. We keep finding new galaxies. We've done a lot of work out there. We're starting to actually realize that one of the things we know less than we know about the universe is the bottom of the ocean. But the one thing between those two things is our thinking, that we haven't looked at honestly enough to begin to actually reckon with this and see the toxic nature of the decisions we've been making and the accumulated poisons and pollutions that we're struggling with today. And I'm not signing it off as something only happening by humans. Nature also creates gases that are poisonous. If you get near the edge of a volcano, there are plenty of gases there that you do not want to be breathing. There are threats on the planet, earthquakes and tornadoes, and we're seeing them happen at a greater and greater rate. But any part we've played in that might be worth noting and might be worth conceding as individuals to begin with, to see that collectively, if we can do this individually honestly, we can do it collectively honestly. And all of a sudden, the paradigm shifts that have occurred during history have clearly begun with resistance at first and eventually just acquiescence by all. The fact that we're not at the center of the universe was a big argument for a long time. And once it was settled, everybody just said, oh, okay, now the orbits make sense. Now we know more about many other things by thinking of that one thing correctly.
Yeah.
So I have resistance, Gabe. I have denial. I know that there are still thoughts I'm attached to that I don't even think I think about. And I know when I have that feeling that you were describing, that that's what I'm doing. So I just say, okay, still doing that. I can live with that. I can concede that. There's nothing I have to do about it, but I can begin to concede it. I can begin to have it. And what I realize is that I can't let go of something that I don't have. I can't let go of something that has me. And I won't let go of something I think I don't have. And that denial is built into that. And I know that there are limits in my own thinking that are still creating that condemnation, which feels very, very fearful to face. But the fear that I'm having is the knowing that I can go off the deep end again and continue to make believe that it's true. That's the fear that I'm really witnessing. So I'm bullying my own experience into thinking the only thing I can do is submit to the bully, when I'm thinking of the bully as being something separate than I'm actually doing. In the moment, I'm witnessing it and saying, of course I fear that I'm creating, because I know I can go down that rabbit hole and make believe it's true, and make believe that the deeper I get, the better off I am, when there's no treasure at the end of that promise. None. The treasure is actually in the learning when we stop digging, like we talked earlier. The bottom we find. The bottom is that point where we decide not to dig any further because we're already there. We've always been there. It's not some place to get to. It's the place we've always been. It's always here. It's always now for humans. And within the spiritual nature, that absolute nature, Santiago, there is no here and now, because there is no dimension in that. There is no time in that. The dimensional qualities and the time qualities that we're so familiar with as defining our universe don't exist in that other realm. So there's no beginning, no end, there's no death, there's no birth, it's just an absolute constant awareness of awareness and a constant knowing of knowing. So thinking of those things is inspiring. And yet it also clarifies, to your point, Gabe, it also makes the things that are distressing and sees them clearly. In the Course in Miracles, it says, if you're starting to see this clearly, you should be disturbed. Which was sort of a little unnerving in the first couple pages to say, what? I thought we were getting a new solution here. But they were talking about the fact that when you become aware of the awareness, the chronic sick nature of the thinking becomes obvious. And it can be very depressing to see that a life has been spent in the direction of trying to go someplace that can't be achieved, while we've been in the place we've been trying to go the whole time.
Mm-hmm. And I want to say something, Jack, to you. During all those 14 years, I had those kind of experiences exactly you are sharing. So when you share some information, I remember having that experience and how I help myself to go out. I call that. But I recognize when you are sharing this information, and I will call this a secret. Okay, the secret is to be open. Okay, this is my perspective. Be open to receive the information, and just it's the energy. It will como es fluir. It will just go.
Flow.
Yes, it's what it is. It's there. It's just there. It's there.
Well, think of the word current is current.
Yes.
Current is a flow, but it's current. It's here. It's always, it isn't, if it's somewhere else, we can't use it. If it's here and always here, it isn't someplace, even in the dictionary definition, it talked about sort of an inexhaustible limit that was always growing. My sense is we've mistaken forever for something that never can happen because it takes forever to get for forever. Versus seeing that the present state of being is absolutely present and there is no forever because it's always here. It's always now. It's always happening in the present. It's always knowing. It's always being. It's always whole. It's always complete.
But that thought, los pensamientos, that is the problem. Is
Yes.
what we have here. Yes.
Well, it's the potential problem. It isn't. I mean, the potential to be wrong is great because if there's only one way to be right, it means every other choice is wrong. So we're constantly, like a sailor is never exactly on course. They're just adjusting as they go. And if they adjust properly and adequately, they'll end up where they're heading. So for us, we're kind of at sea emotionally, literally emotionally. We're moving because our thoughts are changing constantly. And if the thoughts were changing, we're trying to fix and stay in place. We're trying to make believe that it's the thinking that we're actually admitting the thinking is broken while making believe we can fix it rather than see that the idea that it should be fixed means it shouldn't be changing when it's actually always changing. It's always going to be changing. If it's easy to see that it's always changing, we can always see that we can always change our mind. Always. We never are condemned to being stuck, except in the idea about the idea that we're having that gives us that impression.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yes.
So part of your point, Lenses, is that if we can talk about this openly, you begin to see that we create sort of a holographic experience. When there's more than two people, I think 2 dimensions is a lot different than 3 people, because you get to that 3-dimensional state where we're actually replicating it by having 3 perceptions, 3 perspectives, and also those perceptions. And all of a sudden, that sort of holographic image you can find yourself in it very easily because it begins to reflect all of those complicated possibilities, but they're not all that complicated. They're not all that varied. They're very similar. And the similarity becomes obvious. And to your point, Santiago, in sobriety, they talk about looking for the similarities rather than the differences. We can divide and divide and divide and divide and try to conquer and fail. And we can notice that in an indivisible state, there is no division. And realize that that is, in fact, the winning source of knowing. And that is, in fact, the winning state of our being. And it's winning because it actually doesn't lose. It has nothing to lose. There isn't any loss in it. And the universe effectively is that there's no loss of energy in the universe when things change or transform. It's just a constant evolution of that transformation. So the energy always stays the same. It doesn't become less or more. So our thinking really never becomes less or more, except to the imagination we have about the thinking that we're doing that is either less or more, trying to fight to get rid of the things we don't think we want and get more of the things that we can't ever seem to get enough of. Mark, were you here when I mentioned the gambling?
Yes.
Okay, so she said yesterday that the biggest addiction is gambling, and that's what, because she's a money laundering. Dr. Jan Schwartz is a money laundering expert who works with Homeland Security, National Defense Agency, NSA, FBI, all those different groups that look at that corruption within society. And she said the number one cause of that money, I thought it was drugs, as I said earlier, is gambling.
I believe it. I've witnessed it.
Very interesting. Well, and interestingly too, taking drugs is a gamble. Relying on thoughts that will always fail as though they're going to succeed is a gamble. We're actually betting on something that the odds are absolutely against ever happening, and we keep betting by making more investments in those thoughts and think we're going to get better.
Absolutely. Like when you were talking about standing on the edge of a cliff every time
Yeah.
taking a step off, like
Yeah.
exactly.
There was a psychiatrist or psychologist that I read once that said that the reason people fear being at an edge like that on a building or something is because they're afraid they'll jump. And he was really pointing to the fact that when circumstances get overwhelming, we often do the exact opposite thing that would make sense. And I did a little research during COVID between the near-death experiences and also suicides. The people who have jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived, every one of them to a person said nothing was as bad as this. The clarity they got once they jumped while they were in midair was all those problems I had just got very, very small that I used to justify this step that I took. And those out of the 80 some people, I think it was, that have survived, only single digit number in the very low single digits ever went back and did it again. Because the awareness struck them immediately. Now, I would say we don't have to be near death to actually begin to realize that we are always near death to the degree that our body is always susceptible to death. And we don't need to be there to finally look honestly at what we're doing, to have that reckoning and accounting that people seem to talk about seeing your life pass before you in that moment before death, as though that's the only time we can do it. We can actually do it while we're fully awake. That's the awakening. Noticing we're culprits in the actions that we're taking. The thinking we're taking is an action. The feelings we're having is an effect. The words we're using are based on those. The actions we take beyond that are based on those. They're all actions. They're all a process of things happening and occurring. So to begin to face it, to Jana's point earlier, is begin to actually wake up and realize that the reckoning is in the present. It's with all the ideas I have about the past and future that aren't true because I'm thinking about a past and future that's wholly imagined in my thoughts, doesn't actually exist anywhere. The moment is the culmination of everything that's ever happened anywhere anything's ever happened right now. And it's also the same presence of that presence that hasn't been happening, but has always been present. Because in that present state of being, to Santiago's question, there is no process. It's just a state of being that's absolute. It's perfect. And it's simple because it doesn't change. It couldn't be any simpler because there's no change in it. So when we think it's complicated, it's the thinking we're doing about it that's complicating. And starting to own that, literally come to terms with it and say, oh, I am the one doing, I am choosing that. It makes no sense when you see it clearly any more than picking up a drink or going to gamble makes any sense once you know where it will lead. When you know that there's a bodily reaction that's going to take over, when you do that, that inducement is not as powerful as the one that we think it's the only thing we can do when we're stuck in that thought. To see those thoughts as observers is to see that we've never been in the thoughts. We only think we're in the thoughts once we make believe that the thoughts are real, and that becomes who we are. So that distinction is very easy because it's the essence of simplicity, by conceding that state of being is always our state. It's everyone's, everything's. That means it's inclusive, unified, in absolute whole terms. To no end, literally, absolutely to no end, to no beginning, just a present state that's always new, always new, always new, always new. That means everything that's possible is always possible. And what we choose are always possibilities, including when they're insane. We're free to choose insane thoughts and rely on them as though they're sane, and act then as though we're sane while we're doing things that are insane, and might need to come to terms with that at some point if we choose to, or want to come to terms with it. So my sense is we do not need to rest in peace in earth while we can rest in peace and have the potential to do that on earth. There's no reason to delay it. It's almost a chronic addiction to make believe we need to die to face reality and go to heaven, rather than begin to notice that that absolute nature can't possibly be devoid of our experience right here now. It would not be infinite if it were devoid. If there was a gap, there would be no infinite source, because the gap would identify it as a dimensionally based, time-based seeming reality.
Yes.
Now, that may seem like a lot of fancy words, but just go with your experience and see if you haven't got an awareness that often gives you a sense that you know, and you have almost an undue sense of confidence while nobody else can understand what the hell you're doing. It almost calls your actions into question when you know, and kind of act on that knowing. That intuition is actually the nature of inspiration and wisdom. It's natural. And it is our primary knowledge, not some secondary thing we get to. It's the nature of what we have right now, and whether we express it or not is our choice. We're going to either channel it, or challenge it.
Wow.
And to challenge it is just, or to channel it is just to express it and say, oh, but that's the nature of my nature. That's the nature of my nature. And beginning to concede that will have you say things that you can't believe came out of your mouth, because you will not have calculated those things. You will not have analyzed. You'll just know to say those things. You'll know to act on those things. You'll be in accordance with those things that are happening, rather than feeling maligned and disconnected and conflicted. That's the nature of nature. Any más?
Like Roberto Duran, no mas.
No más.
Can you repeat the Holy Trinity, please? The unholy Trinity, the unholy.
I have nothing to do with it, which comes with the idea also, Jana, that it's happening to me rather than being caused by me. Second state is, if I have nothing to do with it, I can do nothing about it. So now I'm in the delusion of feeling I'm a victim to it, because again, it's happening to me now, not by me. And the third one is, the only thing I can do is continue doing what I've been doing that's wrong. It's exactly what addiction is. Think
can
about the
just-
drinking. You just keep drinking and drinking and drinking, thinking drinking's going to fix it. I did it for 17 years, thinking drugs and alcohol would save me. And literally believed it. I mean, I had the insane idea that it would really win out someday. Never did. When I looked at it, I thought, I knew the first time I drank. I drank 8 ounces of scotch and 8 ounces of bourbon the first time I ever drank 2 8-ounce glasses of warm scotch and bourbon. I didn't even need the physical craving to be convinced that I had a problem. And I knew it because I never did it the way other people were doing it. I always overdid it. I always tried to drink the quart, not the cup. So to have that pinprick of one experience reveal this underlying nature that is the absolute, as far as I'm concerned, it's been, as long as humans have subjected people to oppression, suppression, and death as a result of not thinking like the people who think they're in power, this ailment has been suffered by humanity. Can seem preposterous, but there's been many turning points in human history where, I mean, the whole idea of Alcoholics Anonymous was thought of as preposterous in the mid-30s when it first came out. People didn't take to it immediately. It took a minute for people to start seeing that actually there was some results being caused, and they might want those results, and those results might be what they're after all along, to have that turn occur. And then the populace that grew around that began to be very obvious to people that something was happening that hadn't been thought possible. So it comes from the individual participation. Each of you, everyone you talk to, all of the potential people out there who are listening, It's not just what we're saying here, it's what's known by all as it is expressed, despite the preposterous nature of it in the reactive thinking that's irrational, beginning to notice that we have a knowing sense that's absolutely always been there. We've always been aware of it, and we wouldn't have suffered so desperately if we weren't aware of it. Desperation would have been natural, and it would have been a high point for us. Same with conflict and anguish, emotional turmoil. All of it would be seen as a glowing report on our success, because it would have been all we could do. The more of it would mean the merrier. And it isn't that way. People never come to me and say, can you help me think more negative thoughts and feel worse? We're chronically trying to feel better because we're chronically maintaining thoughts that aren't true as reality. And they aren't. They're simply thoughts. And to think about thinking itself and presume that that's ourself is a big leap. It's just more thinking about thinking, which will not end as long as we maintain that idea. It'll just continue as long as, till the death of the body, it will continue, which is why suicide is so high now. People can't take it anymore because there's absolutely nothing to take but a mental idea that has no basis whatsoever. And it literally doesn't drive people crazy. It's crazy to be maintaining that thought presently. You don't need to be driven there to be doing it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, everybody. I am taking off.
What are you making for dinner, Santiago?
I have not decided yet. I was very focused in your talk. So, but it will be something good. Want to come for dinner, Jack?
Santiago, I can't do it tonight, but Santiago is a master chef.
Oh my God, not true. Not true.
No, he's absolutely, and he has a garden at his house that's terraced with all kinds of fresh basil and tomatoes and cucumbers and zucchinis, and beautiful. He gave me a zucchini that was 1.5 feet long.
All right.
Anyway,
well, thank you.
Bon
Bye,
appetit.
guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you all for being here
Santiago.
today.
Bye, bye.
It's good
Bye,
to see you,
honey.
Santiago.
Yeah,
Thank you all
really
for
good to
being
see
here
you.
and participating. And remember, too, during the week is when sometimes in the immediacy of the conversation, it's a little hard to absorb and grasp because there's a lot going on. I mean, to expose your experience to a conversation that's talking about things that are natural and absolute can be very disarming to a lot of the thinking you're doing that may be trying to compete for your attention. And during the week when it isn't going on, just start to notice the shifts, start to notice the subtle awarenesses, start to notice the flexibility in areas that haven't been flexible. And you'll start to see that thing you were describing, Jana, of faking it till you make it, to begin to see that even if we pretend we're doing it, there's an awareness that grows because we've been pretending we're not doing it. Pretending we are doing it would certainly offer potentially better insight than the pretending we're not. Right? Because it gets us to the other side. The pretending we're not, if it's the chronic nature of addiction, at least pretending we are is beginning to acknowledge we may have something to do with this and start to see that even the pretend is pretense and a mask. And yet, if we can do that, and we can do the other, there's a freedom in that balance rather than think the only thing we can do is the negative. We didn't do anything. We haven't done anything about it. We can't do anything about it. The only thing we can do is continue. There's a freedom of seeing positions we take that we think have no other positions, in seeing that all other people have the right to take all positions too, and so do we. We're never stuck in positions we take. They're choices we make. We're never stuck. We can always take any other choice. That's the whole point of choice. So witness those things.
There
Look
is
at
no
those.
right or wrong in that, right?
Well, what happens though is that the rightness of life's terms becomes obvious and the rightness becomes function. So if I have a functional ability and I'm doing things on that basis, it's going to be very attractive to other people because they're going to see results that they've been trying to get by being dysfunctional happening. Because nature, by the laws of nature, is completely functional. It doesn't operate on dysfunction at all. It's constantly developing and growing. And if things are not healthy, they go extinct. They just run their course. They're over. But the benefit to all the other things that continue to maintain health is to utilize whatever it is that's no longer being utilized by that thing. that group, that essence, that whatever it was at whatever time. But the essence doesn't go anywhere. Only the functional, physical, transformative things, plants, animals, minerals, all this sort of changing stuff seems to come and go. So the rightness, I would say, is something that works. The wrongness is something that will never work. And
Well,
we know
our essence is just our incorruptible innocence. So if we can have that
Yes.
in our awareness, then we're halfway there.
Well, what happens though, Jen, is it gives us clarity on the right and wrong within our human experience. And I think that's what I was getting at. So yes, you're absolutely right that essence, if the essence is essential, then it is the absolute clear lens we have to look at how we're operating on the basis of that clearly and see that the things, if I'm trying to eat and constantly starving by throwing the food over my shoulder, I would probably think that may not be right. That may ultimately be something I could correct, get the food to my mouth. The same with my thinking. If I'm thinking thoughts that are constantly causing conflict and inner turmoil, emotional turmoil and anguish, might be worth noticing that if I can do that, I don't have an obligation to continue. And start noticing that those preoccupations do not give me a lot of time. When I'm preoccupied with things that I'm thinking are real, that are delusional, that's exactly what defines insanity. I'm hearing voices in my head that are talking about thoughts that don't have any basis. So I'm hearing voices that don't exist, and I'm seeing things that don't exist, and I'm basically living an insane, I'm approaching life from an insane point of view. So I can probably survive, which my experience is it kind of gives testament to the fact that we do know better, that we can seem to just break even and just get by all the time, rather than begin to live in the natural abundance we have when we start thinking in accordance with that absolute state of being that's a perfect guide and a perfect source of knowing that doesn't fail. Our failing is in the thinking we do. The wrong is in the thinking we do. But ultimately, the wrong is a lesson for right all the time, a chance to just learn and grow and develop. Like any professional athlete, they always practice. Tennis players are always practicing. They don't say, look, I'm the best in the world, I'm done practicing. They practice more than other people. Our practice is beginning to come to terms with whatever we face, honestly, and see how much easier it gets when we begin to see it not as a challenge to our authority and self, but as an opportunity to grow and learn. Then all of a sudden the failure becomes the growth immediately.
You know what I'm suffering from? I'm
Please.
suffering. I'm suffering from lack of dialogue because I've let go of the story. And
Yeah.
so when I'm interacting with other people, like I have a friend on the Big Island and he calls like pretty much, every other night. We talk for about an hour. And I don't have a lot of input because the dialogue it's not in the state of awareness that we've learned to live in or be aware of our awareness. I just don't have the stories anymore. I don't have the umph in me to share those stories. And he tries to get stuff out of me. And we've gone through different stories of his life and they're all right, whatever. Everyone's entitled to their story, but I just think of it all as such a story now. Like I don't talk about stuff and I don't feel like it's lacking, but I think other people may feel like I'm not participating as much as I could.
Well, you've always been participating to the degree that you've been participating, and to think about what they're thinking is somewhat of indication that you're still wondering about your thinking. But it's okay because you're talking about, Gabe talked about the same thing. He said it's very difficult to go to dinner parties now because it's like most of it is small talk around drinking and about storytelling. And nothing wrong with any of that. But when it becomes the sole source of social engagement, where's the engagement around the essence of our existence when what we're talking about is basically circumstantial evidence? Circumstantial evidence as court is considered the weakest evidence. But we rely on it quite a bit. And Jen, I'm with you too. I often feel somewhat uncomfortable in those situations because I don't even feel like responding. I don't even know what to respond to.
Yeah, and I don't. And I just don't feel like my story. I mean, I'm sure it exists out there in the overall scheme of the world somehow, but it would only be my own interpretation. I just don't want to conjure it all up. And what I say is, they're like, well, what about you? I mean, and you know my experience with Delmar and Parkinson's and all of that. I don't even say that I'm a real estate broker. And I've done that since I was, 45 years this year or something. I've been licensed, and I don't even feel like that has anything to do with the essence of who I am or my story. And I sure as fuck don't want to talk about real estate anymore, even though I'm still licensed. That's not my gig at all. And, I don't know that I'm lacking so much, or I don't feel like I'm lacking, and I'm not super bored with their stories, but it's just a different, I guess it's kind of like a different level of awareness. And I have,
Yeah.
I have compassion for my fellow man, and I enjoy them being able to share with me. I'm glad they're sharing with me.
So maybe there's nothing left for you to learn, and maybe there is. And the point is that we're all somewhat susceptible to social intercourse because it's so critical, and yet it hasn't been that healthy for a long time. One of the things that started to occur to me after it's kind of like people who used to come to me the first time would tell their story for 20 minutes and I'd let them go, and I'd let them talk, and I'd let them talk, and I'd let them talk, and I'd let them talk. And then I would say, okay, I'm back.
Yes,
as though I hadn't been
I
listening.
Remember that. I remember that.
Completely stopped them from the parade in the future. But a more modern version of that I often use to try to stimulate thought or a conversation after somebody tells me their story that is they want me to understand. I say, well, that's a thought.
Yeah. And that is helpful. And
it's so simple, but it disarms the whole idea that I should have to engage around this other thing and then start to trade my story in for some form of connection.
Well, the reason that this dialogue with this particular human has worked is because he really doesn't, he's not interested in my story. So I've just become the perfect listener in this exchange of energy, because that's pretty much what
Right.
life is, an exchange of energy. And I was thinking about it, and I was just kind of pondering what this all is, or where it's going, or what it's going to be. And I thought, this is perfect, because he's not judging me for not participating. He's so freaking delighted to have an audience. So maybe that's just it is what it is, obviously. But I was feeling like I was lacking because I'm not shy, and I have stories. Fuck.
Well, and what's interesting about that too, Jana, if you actually just listen to somebody, their story will exhaust itself. Because
that's, oh my God, I'm so glad you said that. I'm so, and to do it, it's almost like, what do they call it, without prejudice? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I didn't conjure it towards its end or anything. I just let it wear out. I haven't given it the energy. And so I think it's the healthy way to do it, because now we were at 6 weeks of dialogue or something. And it is just peeling out, because I don't like, she left me 9 years ago. She just walked out. Do I say like, oh, well, what happened? I don't say a word.
Yeah. Well, and if you think of therapists, that's often what they do too, is they're not trying to respond to the story. They're trying to take it to begin to expand the consideration so the story can begin to dissolve.
Yes. And I think it's a healthy thing. I think it's good.
Well, think of if the absolute nature is absolute, it doesn't occupy mathematics. So it's effectively multiplying something that's thought to be everything by zero. And what does it end up? Nothing.
Are we back to neutrality, my favorite subject in the world? And responsibility. Well, responsibility is my number one favorite subject. My second is neutrality. Between responsibility and neutrality, I have found a lot of peace in my life.
Well, what's really responsible?
Me? No, the universe.
Neutrality. Neutrality is the responsible nature of. Think of all numbers on both sides of zero basically equal each other in zero. If you've got 20 trillion and you have minus 20 trillion, what happens? You got zero.
Is
perfect
zero
balance.
finite? Is zero finite or infinite?
Gabe?
Yeah,
Gabe.
I would say infinite, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it represents the potential. I talked to everybody the other day. I don't think you were there, John. I think it may have been on our walk. The sentence, nothing matters. So that sentence can be looked at in two different ways. One is that nothing matters, like it doesn't matter. And the other way is nothing matters. So what happened in mathematics when zero was, by the way, this was discovered. Here's another transition of human thought. There was a point that there was no zeros. So everything was hash marks. And they used to have warehouses filled with stone tablets, filled with accounting for things. Who had what and how many and who owed what and all that kind of stuff when debt was starting and people were actually noticing that they could lend but the accounting had to be in order. And all of a sudden zero became a placeholder. A placeholder. Isn't it interesting? Zero is a placeholder. Whose place is being held? Our place. It's the neutrality of the present. We're not condemned to it because you can't be condemned to having everything. How could you be condemned to having everything? Because there's nothing you'd be deprived of. So within mathematics, it started in the Middle East. They began to realize that if you introduce this concept of zero, you could carry numbers and do everything you needed to do on a single tablet or in the sand at that point. So what happened in Europe was they thought it was heretical because it was magic. It was black magic because you could disappear things. And they thought that was magic. And so what did they do? Fought the idea for 100 years. Why? They were maintaining ideas that weren't true in the face of something that actually works. Took them a long time to come to terms with it. Now, something as simply as math can be proven on paper very quickly. And yet, even with that simple, obvious solution, people fought it and fought it and fought it. The church was part of that sort of black magic concept. So, point is, it's easy to be reactive, it's easy to be defensive, it's easy to deny if it's what has largely been happening through history. And think of it as normal, but it is abnormal and it's unnatural and it's unhealthy and it is diseased because it is not easy and it is not simple to complicate simplicity by making believe what we think about reality is reality, when reality doesn't need our thinking at all. To concede that is to start to express it and to start to freely talk about it and start to begin the invigoration of seeing what inspiration is and how quickly people's lives are affected when anything is introduced in ways that aren't complementing and enabling that other form of destructive thought.
Well, reality is a bird just flew into my living room.
What's that?
Bird just flew in my house.
Yeah.
You have a cat?
Well,
I do not have a cat, but now I've got a bird in my house.
He's your new
that's good.
friend. Offer him some coffee.
What kind of bird?
Looks like a
Pelican?
no, like a small little bird, like a blue jay, sort of. But
Yeah.
small. Oh, it's stuck up.
Open windows, they'll find their way out.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
Or
Okay.
it'll find its way out. Anyway, thank you guys very, very much. All of you guys and gals, I appreciate it. This is, to me, the chance to begin to be better during the week at speaking openly, because every one of the interactions we have is a chance to begin to develop a conversation and align words around this that are hopefully more accurate than yesterday. And that process is the learning, is the experience, is the exercise, is the practice. So I appreciate doing it with all of you, and I love you for showing up and participating, and everyone out there listening. If you have any questions, we've got a link in the introduction section where the text is on any of the podcasts, I believe. They're on all the different things. I know they're within Buzzsprout, and I think it's within Apple that you can text through to us, and we can take up your question next time together. You're welcome to join us. Anyone who's out there listening, we can send you a link and have you join us and participate. And we're just happy to have you listening and considering and noticing your own involvement. We appreciate it a lot. Thank you. Love you guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Jack.
Love you, Jack. Thank you.
Jack.
Love you,
Love
Jack.
you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.